Let us now go to Washington, D.C., where the Reverend Barry W. Lynn is standing by. He is a lawyer, a barrister, a member of the Supreme Court bar, as well as an ordained minister in the United Church of Christ, and of course, ran Americans United for Separation of Church and State for nearly a quarter of a century. I know you want to talk about some stuff, but when you look at Ukraine, Reverend,
Yes.
Joe Biden, am I wrong? Because I keep asking this. If you know that Putin is going to attack, and you've said this, 10 days before the attack, what do you do if you're the president of the United States? What is your obligation to the people of Ukraine, the people of Russia, and the world? If you're the leader of the free world and you know that Putin's going to attack Ukraine, what do you do if you have 10 days before the attack?
I honestly think that Joe Biden did the right thing 10 days before. But I think so far he's played this very, very well. He's taken certain things off the table. No ground troops in defense of Ukraine. He's made it clear that this no-fly zone idea. A lot of people get confused about it. No-fly zones, historically, you designate a certain part of the world or part of a country, and you basically say any military aircraft that goes over this area will be literally shot down. You don't chase it, you shoot it down. And that's why so many people say if that was the case, a no-fly zone guarantee, which is what Ukraine does want from the West, would be World War III, because anytime a Russian fighter went over, there would be an obligation to shoot it down. So I don't think you can do that. I wish that people would take seriously the fact that these sanctions, although they seem to be working, I want to talk in a minute about just how little we know and what crucial things we don't know about what's going on in Ukraine. But if you believe some of it, things are not going terribly well. I mean, how many times can you look at that 40-mile long collection of tanks and other militarized vehicles and wonder, gee, is it really going to get there? What will happen to it? It's so
you're saying that Russia doesn't seem to be doing all that well in Ukraine and is meeting stiff resistance.
It's meeting stiff resistance is what we see. But what we also don't see, how do we know, for example, I just watched NBC. How do we know that all of the people that are being interviewed by the correspondents from NBC or CNN that are over there are in fact of one mind? I mean, they tend to be people, they have a dog and a couple of kids, and they're interviewed and one of them is crying. And is that representative of everyone, or is that a highly selective group of people to be interviewed? And I think it gets worse when you go into Russia. They're desperately trying to find people who say, my son's in the army, I'm very afraid of what's going to happen, tearful. There was even a story on CNN today about some organization that is providing Russian soldiers with an opportunity to call their mothers to commiserate with them. And it tears at the heartstrings. It plays on all kinds of fantasies we have about the way, boys and their mothers function. But is it demonstrably true? Does this happen a lot? Is this just one little cute story because
is this propaganda? Is it
propaganda or is it not? And but the other things nobody talks about. Who would succeed Putin? What do we know about it? We do know that he has
Medvedev.
What?
Would it be Medvedev?
It could be. but it could be a lot of other people. So now we see, now there's a narrative, and it's not just coming from Sean Hannity, that maybe we should assassinate, maybe we should encourage. And in fact, one of the oligarchs who hasn't been back, to Russia, I think since 2009, has offered $1 million for somebody to take him out. And I know people on the left too that have said there should be more people looking for him to be taken out, been assassinated. If you even think that's a potentially good idea, you have to know who would succeed Putin. And Putin said he might not run again in 2024. Of course, he'll be elected because it's all quasi-fraudulent elections. But we don't know. If someone, it kind of goes back to Hitler. There was this major plot to assassinate Hitler. It failed. And even Dietrich Bonhoeffer, the great theologian, although it's never been clear to me exactly what role he played in, and he clearly was encouraging it. But at that time, who knew who would replace Hitler? There were lots of evil actors in Nazi Germany besides Hitler himself. Would it have made a big difference? But now the stakes are much higher. If you take out Putin, who's threatening in vague ways to use nuclear weapons, maybe be somebody who'd be more willing to use it. What if you got rid of him and half of the Russian people said, well, we didn't like the war, but we really don't like the people that took out our elected leader, Vladimir Putin. We don't know any of these things. Nobody ever asks these questions. The debates, the discussions, the interviews on all the major networks just ignore even dealing with these issues. They ask the same questions. CNN, you can watch any show, if it's at 8 o'clock in the morning or 8 o'clock at night, and you're going to see the same correspondents asking the same questions, pretty much of the same people. Lots of retired military people, diplomatic people who haven't been in Russia, for 10 or 20 years, and they're all asked to opine on this. When you and Emil were talking about Russia Today, which is now basically off the air, Russia Today is a propagandist outlet. But then again, there are people on it. When Ed Schultz was thrown off of MSNBC, and I think he was, I don't know, because he's dead now, and I never talked to him about why he thought he was, I think he was thrown off because of the Keystone Pipeline. He was against it. Nobody else. The NBC is so interconnected with energy companies that it's hard to figure out the difference sometimes. Nobody else was going after that. He did, he took him on, and then all of a sudden he's fired. So where does he go? RT, which I think at the time was actually called Russia Today. Then they cleaned it up and called it RT. Thom Hartmann is one of my favorite people working in radio. He's always been. Here's a guy who single-handedly went city to city to city as a progressive, a really smart progressive, and got on local radio stations. Then he was given an opportunity, which I think he was still on RT even a week ago.
Christopher Hedges.
Oh, Christopher Hedges. Yeah, I mean, he's kind of an odd figure in some ways. And I guess Dennis Miller had a show. But Hartmann and Ed Schultz, these are not people, in my experience, who were ever compromised by their appearance. But I know when I started going on Ed Schultz's show on Russia Today, even my own staff said, why are you doing this? Might make us look bad. But I never knew Ed to compromise on anything. And he didn't talk a lot about foreign policy. And, MSNBC has a lot of people on it. I've told you my story about it. I mean, they're so interested in having people on that network who don't rock the boat in ways that the leadership of NBC doesn't want them to be rocked. And are they a propagandist? I don't know, but it's become increasingly lousy journalism. Tom Hartman, I mean, good God, the guy's written like 20 books.
I know. He's amazing.
He talks about these things. And, when Air America started, I had high hopes for it. And then they had, Liz Winstead was a big player in that at the beginning. Then they fired her. And, what were we left with? We were left with Rachel Maddow, who, is fine up to a point. And then now it's got, I've never figured out Chris Hayes at all. I've never figured, but I knew now that Joe Scarborough, who now I think is on for four hours, certainly was a creator of what we now come to know as the right-wing republicanism. And the guys, they just gave him another hour. What's the point of it? What is the point of having Joe Scarborough just because he doesn't like Trump? Although he certainly loved Trump for a very long time, now he doesn't like him. He criticized him during at least the last 3 years or 2.5 years of his presidency. That's not enough. That's not enough. The guy was an architect of the new right in America. I don't give him any credit, none, for what he's been saying, what he started to say about Trump. I don't care. I just as soon have somebody else say that.
Right.
So I think RT, whether you call it propaganda, it's kind of like Al Jazeera. People didn't want that. I used to go on Al Jazeera. People would go, "Oh, well, that's that's there's a bunch of Islamic terrorists that watch it too." I don't care. If you're going to get the message out, that's what you need to do. You have to be forthright.
Al Jazeera is a great network.
I agree.
And I go to their website all the time. And I'm looking at RT. The website is still up. And let me read you a couple of headlines. It's done. It's out of business. In fact, I think it's now shut down. I can't get to it. It's been shut down. I was just looking at it. Here's banner headline: Ukraine accuses Russia of shelling nuclear power plant. So is that propaganda? That seems true, doesn't it?
Sure.
They've just shut it down. Yep, you can't. Wow. Okay. I had one liberal Russian TV channel suspends operations. Moscow's Dozhd station has decided to go temporarily off air amid the war in Ukraine. Let me just read you what it says here.
All right.
Moscow's liberal television station has temporarily suspended broadcasts, blah, 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 blah. Russian regulators blocked the station's signal 2 days ago, citing alleged false reporting about the war in Ukraine. So RT is, I'm just saying RT, that's what the West is reporting.
Sure.
That Russian regulators shut down
Absolutely.
a liberal station. And don't we lose something if we don't have Russian television?
Yeah, absolutely. You absolutely lose something. And if we can't, a listener sent me a wonderful article today by Phyllis Bennis, who she's a great international scholar, foreign policy scholar, works at the Institute for Policy Studies, which gives a good, strong, and I think generally very, very honest assessment of the failings of US foreign policy. And she talks about how if you're going to talk about Ukraine, you have to look at the history, not just the history of 2 weeks ago, but the history of what happened back in 1991. And I know in 1991, there were a lot of us and a lot of people with much longer credentials in foreign policy than I have who said, look, There is no Warsaw Pact anymore. The entire Soviet Union is broken up. Maybe this would be a really good time for NATO to disband. And people, serious people, made that argument. The United States rejected that argument. And we decided not only to not dissolve it, but to increase it so that some of those states that were once part of the Warsaw Pact now have become supporters of NATO. We let them in.
There was even talk of letting Russia in at one point.
There may have been. Well, Ukraine
Seriously
tried to get in, and France, maybe another country as well, but France balked at that and didn't allow them in. But once you do that, once you get to that point, then you have to figure out, since we can't replay history, we recognize that there may have been mistakes, but what do you do right now? And that's, of course, the question that's on everyone's mind. And I think it's what she argues in this article. And as I said, if you go to the Institute for Policy Studies, I'm sure you can read it. It's a relatively short article. You have to go deeper into diplomacy. You have to make sure that this is going to work, and you have to take it seriously. There have been glimmers of hope on this diplomatic front just in the last 24 hours, where there's some kind of apparent agreement about preserving the right of refugees to leave Ukraine, guarantee their safety. If that's true, that's one of the good steps that certainly could be undertaken. But it may be small. To me, and I think I said this last week, it sounds silly to people, but war is not going to end in the world until people refuse to fight it. So it's good news that there are actually Russian soldiers who are apparently saying, we're not shooting people that look just like us. And in addition, the fact that there's an anti-war movement in Russia is so extraordinary. I mean, if you've objected to Hitler, they'd probably shoot you right away. But they've arrested thousands of average Russian citizens who have gone out knowing that they were going to be arrested, knowing that they were going to be hit on the head, and they still go out and protest and get arrested. That's the extraordinary power of anti-war movements. It was helpful when in the United States and in most of Europe, people objected to Vietnam, but this is much more essential. These are people who say right at the beginning of the war, we want no part of this. We've been lied to and we're not going to take it anymore. And those voices coming from Russia itself are the single, and some days the only thing that I can look at this whole mess and say that is good, because this is what ultimately needs to happen for war to actually cease.
we have oligarchs, Russian oligarchs, and their kids speaking out against the war. The daughter of Putin's press spokesperson came out against the war. So diplomacy. I'm kind of surprised at your answer. What does Biden owe the people of Ukraine in terms of getting on the blower, talking to Putin and saying, what do we have to do to stop this fighting? If you're the president of the United States, am I wrong? It seems to me that if you're the president of the United States, you do everything possible to get a ceasefire going. How much do I have to pay for this ceasefire? What do you want? How do I stop people from getting killed? Isn't that what you have to do?
Yeah,
or is that a sign of weakness?
No, but I think he gets two kinds of advice. One is that it would be a sign of weakness, and the other that it would push Putin so much further into the corner. If you don't have this vaulted exit ramp for Putin, he's got nothing. And then you have to ask the other question that is never asked. What the hell is going on in Putin's head? If I had a nickel for every time in the last 3 days, somebody on one of the networks said, I'm not a psychiatrist, but my opinion about Putin is, and then they give their
They should say, I'm not a
non-psychiatric.
psychiatrist, but I need one.
But
And
I
my,
need one.
you know,
But
you're dodging my question,
I
Reverend.
don't think there's anything that can be done. Well, you started out by saying what could have been done 10 days before. There's one way that here's one off ramp that he could talk about. But of course, if this were ever leaked to the press, it would be fatal. He could say, look, in 5 years, we're going to take this section of Ukraine on the east that is primarily Russian speaking and Russian culturally, and we're going to let them vote on whether to form a separate country. This is, of course, what we should have done in Vietnam after the French left Vietnam. There was supposed to be a plebiscite. And of course, the United States was afraid that would mean Ho Chi Minh was elected president. We couldn't have that. The guy's a communist. So we
Well, he did.
never
There was a
allowed
vote.
them to have it.
No, we did. They lost. We had the vote.
No, they didn't have a vote. In 1955, they didn't have a vote.
I think they had a vote, and we lost. They voted, and they. Well, anyway, it'd be interesting.
But Ho Chi Minh was very popular, and
right.
If you mean we lost or he lost,
we lost, and then we suppressed the results. That's how
yes. I thought you were talking about that Ho Chi Minh lost. No, he didn't lose, but of course we had a corrupted system, and we covered it up, and we always made him appear to be, the villain in all of this. Of course, at the end of the day, after 55,000 Americans, 250,000 plus Vietnamese die, we leave anyway. We lost. And there might have been wonderful acts of individual heroism on the part of American soldiers, but the intellectual support for that war never made any sense. That's why when the Pentagon Papers first came to light, it was so important that the New York Times had to print it, that Mike Gravel had to threaten to release them in a public document. I mean, these are high stakes things. It was so corrupt. I'm not suggesting that we're covering up as much today, but I am suggesting that we have not been asking terribly rigorous questions, nor gotten people together who can help to explain what are the likelihood of individual people in Russia actually succeeding him, which persons and what do they believe, and then just how dangerous is a Putin now, or if pushed into the corner even further. It's not like nobody thinks about these things, they do. But having some commentator who went to Russia last week start to opine about what they think is going on in the mind of Putin is just useless. It's not information at all. And these are the kinds of pieces of information that are essential to make decisions. If you're Sean Hannity and you want to say, let's cut off, to kill a snake, you cut off its head, implying that that's what we should do. We should go out and assassinate him. There are all kinds of technical issues. Gerald Ford put into place a policy in the United States that we still have that says we don't assassinate world leaders. And then there's another kind of basic point. We're not at war with Russia, so we'd technically be assassinating somebody with whom we are not at war. But that aside, there is a genuine moral question about assassination of world leaders. And nobody talks about it. And people like Sean Hannity just say it. And people, because he is such a despicable character himself, they say, well, it's obvious, that must be wrong. Sean Hannity's in support of it. But
right.
These are questions that ought to be addressed instead of going through the same pictures of the same damn train station with very similar families. I think in one case, there was the same family on two networks, lovely little children, a nice dog, interviewed, what are you doing? They cry. Of course it's horrible. That's what war is. It's a terrible thing. It's horrible. But should you expend time talking to the same family again with their dog, or should you do something to look at what's behind all of this, not just what mistakes we made, but what are the things that can be done? And how do you make an assessment of what to do when you have a person, Putin, who may in fact be mentally ill? How do you assess that? It's not like, there are people that write books about this stuff, but somebody ought to find them instead of finding one more retired diplomat who hasn't been to Russia for a decade to opine about what's going on.
It feels like you're poo-pooing diplomacy. Do you think Anthony Blinken and Putin exhausted all diplomatic channels to prevent this invasion?
I don't know. I don't honestly know. I mean,
well, we saw Zelensky saying, going on national television, please don't invade us. We have no quarrel with the Ukrainian people. Did we see Joe Biden go on national television and plead with Putin not to invade? Did we see Joe Biden? All we saw was Anthony Blinken, our Secretary of State, will not meet with Russia after Putin 2 or 3 weeks ago recognizes the breakaway republics in the Donbass region. So is that what you do when you're on the brink of war? You go, that's it, we're not talking anymore. Aren't you supposed to talk all the way up to the first shots are fired?
I would be very, very surprised if we haven't been doing a lot of mid-level negotiating all the time, including the time that we said that. But Blinken still goes on.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
You've run a major organization.
Yeah.
For 25 years. If you left certain things to people underneath you, and there was a problem with another organization, and if it didn't get resolved, it would be cataclysmic. Would you trust the people working underneath you to have mid-level conversations with the people from the other organization who are also mid-level representatives? Or wouldn't you get on the horn and call the leader of that organization?
Frankly, I would do both. I mean, I have done both. I mean, we're talking about an internecine back. We're talking about internecine.
I'm saying that we have a president. I'm saying we have a president who is controlled, who is taking advice. He's doing what George W. Bush did, which is I'm going to surround myself with the smartest people in the room. I'm going to weigh all their suggestions and then move accordingly. It feels like he's been manipulated by these former West exec lobbyists. And they're saying to him, don't worry, we've got it all under control. It seems to me when you're on the brink of war, the president of the United States should not be saying Putin's going to attack in 10 days. He should be calling Putin up and saying, what do we have to do to make sure you don't attack? What do we do here?
Well, but how many times? Well, he did have that conversation, not 10 days before, but a few days before. But when he gets nowhere, what is he supposed to do? And if he gave an address, which, the State of the Union address was mainly an address, to Putin. Right?
He got nowhere because he wouldn't promise he didn't make a promise that Ukraine would never join NATO. All he had to do, you try everything. How about promising Ukraine doesn't go into the NATO bloc? He didn't try. It's not like what did he try to stop this? Unless you think, it's worth fighting a war so Ukraine could join NATO.
I think it would have been very dangerous to say that, because although I'd be perfectly happy with it, and you would, I'm sure. I don't want Ukraine in NATO, but as I said, I really don't think, I mean, we should 20 years ago have dissolved NATO, but it would
Right.
look weak. It would look weak. This guy, he's constantly being attacked. Biden's constantly being attacked, not only by Republicans who find every reason in the world to oppose everything the guy does. And then a lot of us who snipe at him from the left about a variety of issues. If he said, here's a speech, and I want to say to you, Mr. Putin, or on a telephone call, we will never vote here in the United States to allow Ukraine into NATO. If he said that, and that was reported anywhere, if he said it publicly, he'd have been crucified by most of the American people, including the entire Republican Party, who, once they got over a minor sense that maybe we had no vested national interest in Ukraine, they've now moved from that onto assassination, bloodthirstiness, and I think it would have been suicide for him to do that. Do I think
If
that
you're
that's a
afraid of
legitimate
looking,
solution?
if you're afraid of looking weak, then you are weak. If you're worried about optics, I don't think I think America is strong enough that I like to believe that America and the West is strong enough to prevent war unless it wants war. I think there are people who either think war is good for the military industrial complex, war is good for the banks, or they want to trap Putin in Ukraine. They think they're pulling a Zbigniew Brzezinski. But if you don't want war, as John Lennon said, and Yoko, war is over if you want it. And I think we could have stopped. I like to think highly enough of my country that we have the power, the muscle, and the money to prevent Vladimir Putin from invading Ukraine. I do. I have faith in this country that we have that kind of, we can be that persuasive. I have faith in this country.
Well, I mean, I guess I don't. I mean, I guess I don't. I guess I am. We don't even have people who are willing to say that our incursions into the Middle East, our long war with Vietnam, that they were not just mistakes, but that they were deliberate decisions that were made that were pointless. We were lied to, and we're ready to be lied to again. And that's what I'm afraid is going on now. That no,
Right.
I don't think it's, look, Biden's, although I like Joe Biden, he's never been a courageous person. He's not going to all of a sudden, in this instance, decide that he's going to take whatever. He's down at 32% in the polls. I think I'll announce on television or in a telephone call to Vladimir Putin, don't worry, we'll never vote to let Ukraine into NATO. It's impossible for me to believe that he would ever utter those words. And if you're saying, well, that's what he should do, because the American people will listen to that and they'll say, oh, son of a gun, that's right. Maybe we've been lied to before. Maybe it's not as bad. If you're right about that, then I guess you're right that he could have made a convincing argument to Putin or to the American people. But I'm afraid I'm not that. If that's an affirmation of the American character, I'm afraid I'd have to reject that. I don't think we're that.
Okay. I'm thinking about Jimmy Carter. Help me out here.
Okay.
I'm thinking about the hostages being taken in 78 or 79, 79.
79.
I'm thinking of 79, the hostages, about 50 hostages taken in Tehran. And he was perceived as weak because he was negotiating with Rafsanjani and he was trying to get them out. And it went on, and then we tried a rescue in the desert, and it failed.
Right.
And Cyrus Vance, Secretary of State, resigned at a protest. He got pushed. Carter got pushed to do a rescue of the hostages, which would have left a lot of people dead. Right?
Right. Yes.
But he waited a year, and they came out alive. And we didn't invade Iran. That's a good outcome, in my estimation, considering what America and Great Britain did to Mossadegh in the 50s with Kermit Roosevelt. And Carter knew that, and he just waited it out, and he was humiliated, but those hostages came home alive. Russia invades Afghanistan, and he says, all right, we're not going to the Olympics.
Yeah.
And people hate America. You're not going to the Olympics. And
Sure.
Some say that's one of the reasons he lost. I'm pretty sure Jimmy Carter never got this country into a war. I'm pretty sure.
But
I think he
I've done a lot of reading about the Carter in my files, and I will continue to work on this book of mine, because the two things that he did with the invasion, when we were thinking about Afghanistan and looking at what the Russians were doing there and how they were getting lost in it, he boycotted the Olympics, and he started putting millions of young men's names onto draft registration cards. That's all he did. But if you look at the justification for those kinds of things, you know, the head of the Armed Services Committee at the time was Georgia Senator Sam Nunn, who never knew a war he didn't like, who was in favor of conscription of everybody for any reason at all. I don't think Carter really understood foreign policy. I don't think he had a Carter doctrine. The Carter doctrine never made any sense.
rights.
They go back and
Human
forth.
rights.
But
Human
then
rights.
when you say the hostages came home, that's a good result. Of course, it's a good result. But why did they come home? Because Ronald Reagan was president of the United States. Is that a good outcome? I mean, the Iranians had to be playing this against the map of American politics, knowing that Carter was vulnerable, thinking Reagan might be better for them, and he'd be particularly better if, as soon as he was elected. I think the Iranian hostages came home literally the day Reagan was inaugurated, right?
The minute he was sworn in.
The minute he was sworn in, then they let him.
Right. And that's because George Herbert Walker Bush met with the Iranians in Paris to say, don't release the hostages until Reagan becomes president. You'll get a better deal with us.
Well, he did get a better deal. Did the Iranians get a better deal? Yes, of course. But
they got weapons.
But it's I think the biggest worry I have, I don't know what this fire at the nuclear plant means. I mean, I assume that this nuclear plant is better than Chernobyl's. I'm assuming that some of the catastrophe of Chernobyl that was predicted apparently didn't happen. But we've got a nuclear trigger here. The Iranians didn't have nuclear weapons. The Vietnamese didn't have them. Hitler didn't have them. But now we're in a nuclear world, and the biggest possessors of nuclear weapons are the United States and even more Russia. You
Right.
you have to weigh that. And again, there are people that are vastly more qualified than any of the people that we're talking to here, um, who ought to be giving sound advice about just what the nuclear capabilities are. Would, if he puts, as he did, Putin put the nuclear forces on alert a couple of days ago, and there are all kinds of nuclear weapons. Of course, you don't have to use just intercontinental ballistic missiles. There are actually battlefield weapons, nuclear weapons. You carry them on the battlefield. They cause enormous damage, but it's not a complete conflagration that destroys the entire planet. But I don't
Yeah.
think, and just know what, I can't imagine what he could say or could have said that would have guaranteed that Putin would have said, well, come to think of it, I'm not going to do this. I do think that Putin, honestly, he doesn't want simply to not have Ukraine become a part of NATO. He wants to take over the entire landscape of that huge country because he considers it, or he says he does now, it's just part of Russia. It's never left. We don't want a little piece of it back. We want the entire landscape to be part of Russia once again. That's what he wants. It's hard to negotiate with that point.
Well, it's hard to, don't you think America, if instead of trying to nuzzle up to the oligarchs in Ukraine and help them launder their money, we worried about the Ukrainian people and negotiated with Putin to try to find a more positive outcome?
Yeah,
Don't you think if
of course, but I mean, it's all of these. The ruble is worth a half a cent now. The entire value of currency in the country, just objectively, is now gone down 35 or 40%. I wish one of the other things we talked about, instead of just how this was likely to do damage to the oligarchs, which is good, there's real people in Russia who aren't going to be able to buy bread anymore. No matter what fringe arguments can be made about how Putin's not as terrible as some people think he is, he ain't going to go hungry. It's like people who want to buy gold. I always used to say to people who are peddling gold, they'd say it's the one thing that never loses value. And I would say, listen, I'm going to have 3 loaves of bread. And how many gold bars are you going to give me for those breads when the apocalypse comes? Right?
yeah.
So there's nothing. So you can't, there are real injuries made to real people, no matter what we do. If we think we can keep the blood off of our hands by simply sending more Stinger missiles into this zone of war, but we're not going to send any people, that's a distinction. But when the Stinger missile hits the wrong person, it's not going to matter. The blood's still in the hands of the arms merchants, of which we are and have been for a long time the single largest arms dealer on the planet.
Yeah. So you asked how bad can things get for Russia and how bad can things get for Putin? At some point, the noose will tighten around Russia economically, and Putin will be forced to step down. That is what Biden is hoping for. Well, look no further than Syria. If you want to know how this plays out, there's a distinct possibility that we will see a replay of what happened in Syria. Russia backed Assad since, when did it start? 2011. That war has been going on for 12 years, and everybody tightened the noose around Assad and thought it's only a matter of time before someone either assassinates him or his own military turns on him and he's out of there. Well, Putin stood by Assad. Assad is still in power, and you look at Aleppo, you look at the way the siege warfare that Syria implemented with the assistance, I believe, of Putin, of Russia. I don't know if economic sanctions will get Putin out of there. I don't know if his own people are going to turn on him. I don't know if his own people turn on him, that he would be vulnerable the same way Assad
was not.
If
of course not.
So these people have a way of surviving. Seems to me, and we do have to wrap it up, seems to me the easiest thing to do is talk to these monsters. And we have the power to level them. Even Russia, even with their nuclear weapons, we have economic and military power. We've turned the whole world on Putin. If you are coming from this kind of position of strength that I think this country has, you hop on Air Force One, you fly to Geneva, and you say, Vladimir, what do we do here? What do you need? How can I help you here? That's how they do it in Hollywood. That's how.
Yeah, that's really.
That's how Bernie Brillstein would do it. What do you need?
Yeah, Jack Reacher too. But I don't know what I can't imagine it, in the context of what may be going. Let's assume that most of these reports are right. That there's a growing anti-war movement in Russia. That the oligarchs are really, really angry, and not just the ones that have left a long time ago and want to assassinate Putin, but the people that are still there, and that they're really upset about losing their yachts and all of that. I just think there's a huge difference or a huge step to take from all of those things to anything that you've just said. That is to say that Putin will say, well, I can get out of this now, or I changed my mind. I just don't think this is a guy who's going to be able to say that absent some real concessions that I don't think he's still prepared to make. I don't think he really, the reports are, again, we don't know where these reports come from. He's obsessed with this. He's getting, every half hour he gets a report about how the war is going. That's a sign of a guy who's worried. But is he worried enough to do anything on his own volition? Can we depend on some oligarchs to say, well, let's add to the $1 million bounty another $1 million, and we'll get my third friend who get 3 million. Somebody will take him out. I just think that's unthinkable. Even if it was morally acceptable, I think it's just unthinkable that this is the way this is going to end. So, hey, we didn't do anything lighthearted today, but I do have a lighthearted.
This was shits and giggles.
Exactly. It was just. Hey, we were talking about billions last week.
Yes. I can't get through the 6th season. I'm like, it's just.
But we were talking about the way
love it. I love Billions. I love Billions.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't take itself seriously,
right.
And it's capable of doing some extraordinary things that are brilliantly funny. The acting is amazing.
Yeah.
Little too much music, and I don't like their choice in music. But all in all, it's fun, and that's all anything really has to be. And it's edifying. It gets you in the minds.
It does. But you were pointing out the cultural affirmations that were made that were very, very deep ones. And I was hoping you could tell me when they mentioned cocoa butt, what did they mean in the last episode? Cocoa butt. It was in the last episode, the one that just played on Sunday.
I have no idea.
Yeah. That's because you weren't.
It's almost as though the ghost of Dennis Miller is punching.
Yeah.
It's that's why I love it. Cocoa butt.
Okay, some of us that grew up in the 60s were fascinated for a while by professional wrestling. Not long before Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson was involved, or
Right.
Hulk Hogan. These were guys like
Bruno Sammartino,
San Martino,
Gorilla
Jesus
Monsoon.
Moon, the Sheik, and Bobo Brazil. And Bobo Brazil's iconic move to end his was the Coco Butt, where he would hit into somebody's forehead and daze them, and then go after them and take them down. The Coco Butt, mentioned in Billions just last week.
Well, Maffei is a big wrestling fan.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Dan Soder is great. Dan Soder is such a great actor, the comedian.
Oh,
The
yeah.
Reverend Barry W. Lynn, for nearly a quarter of a century, ran Americans United for Separation of Church and State. He is a lawyer, a member of the Supreme Court bar. He is also an ordained minister in the United Church of Christ, who saw Dr. King speak at Riverside Church. You saw the famous speech.
I saw it the day later when he went to the United Nations. Yeah.
Oh, you saw it at the United Nations.
Yeah. And I said that.
Oh,
I mentioned that several times, but
I
was
thought
not.
you saw.
No, I knew Bill Coffin and all the people that were at the Riverside Church, but I went up with busloads of students to the United Nations a few days later when he spoke. And that of course was when he decided to link the demands of racial and economic equality with ending the war in Vietnam, which was very, very, very controversial.
I don't think he would say right now, Biden's in a tough position.
Maybe not.
I don't think he'd say something along the lines of Biden's hands are tied right now. I don't think he would try to explain realpolitik.
I don't know. I'm just telling you what I think we know about Joe Biden, that he is a man of limited courage and has demonstrated that time and time and time again. And
Yes.
but perhaps things would be different if you were whispering in his ear.
Right.
I don't know.
Go to barrywlynn.com for a treasure trove of this man's writings and his appearances on shows like Firing Line and The David Feldman Show, and John Fugelsang. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Got
We'll
any advice? Final advice? Come on.
Oh, yes. By the way, I'm taking a train tomorrow.
Really?
I'm getting on a train. Yeah.
Where are you going?
I'm going upstate near Albany.
Upstate. Albany.
I'm going to be sitting on a train for 2 or 3 hours. I can't wait.
Oh, yes, you can.
You don't love the Amtrak?
I do love Amtrak, but I thought, don't complain about spending 2 or 3 hours on the train then. Don't suggest that you don't like it.
I love Amtrak. I could sit on a train forever. That's when I'm at my happiest, sitting on a train.
I love trains. My friend, the late Utah Phillips, a folk singer and socialist candidate for the Senate from the state of Utah, when the wars started in the Middle East, he stopped flying anywhere. He stopped performing any place he couldn't get to on a train because he said, I don't get my salaries by having people die for oil. He just wouldn't get on an airplane because of all of the oil that it consumed at a time we were at war, allegedly over oil.
But dying for diesel is okay.
Yeah, diesel's great. And dying for natural gas is almost a sacrament. Okay, okay. I'll
Thank you.
see you next week.
Stay
Bye-bye.
out of trouble, Reverend.
Only good trouble. Bye-bye.
Thank you.